So Dell released two laptops added to their XPS lineup, so the 14 and the 16, and it's been kind of getting attention within the XPS community because, I mean, it's a pretty smallish community, but a lot of people think that the decisions made for the 14 and the 16 have been a little bit controversial. So let's just go with that. But before we go into the 14 and the 16, because I'm only going to touch on those a little bit, I wanted to go over the 13 Plus, which is kind of what started the controversy. And the 13 Plus came out in 2 years ago, so 2022 beginning. And yeah, go over the potentially questionable decisions that they did and the future for the XPS lineup. So here's a closer look at the XPS 13 Plus. You can kind of tell that Dell got a lot of their design choices from Apple and the MacBook, which is kind of a double-edged sword, which I'll explain in a second. But there's a front of the laptop, so the same Dell logo that they've been putting on the XPS lineup since forever. But what do I mean when following Apple is kind of a double-edged sword? So what do I mean when I say that following Apple is a double-edged sword? Well, the positive thing about Apple across pretty much all their devices, but especially with their laptops, is that it's usually a very clean look. So if you look at the MacBook, like any MacBook pretty much, from a top-down level, this is the MacBook Air with like the base M1 chip. So this is the most basic laptop you can get from Apple, but the keyboard looks very clean. From a top-down level, it like the trackpad is symmetrical, and it just has that clean feel to it. Now, the downside of following this clean look is that Apple, as a lot of people are aware, took away a lot of the important ports from their laptops. And Dell is kind of just doing the same thing. So if you look at the side view, this is the left side of the laptop. It has one Type-C port for charging. Look at the other side, it has one other Type-C port. So they're kind of following the MacBook, where pretty much all their all their non 16-inch and 14-inch laptops have only two Type-C ports, and that's it. Before I go further into Dell's design choices with the XPS 13 Plus, I want to go back to the positive sides, or like positive points of this laptop. So, like I mentioned, it's a very clean look. The second thing is that the price is slightly less than the base model MacBook Air, which is pretty much the most basic laptop you can get from Apple. If you compare the same specs, so 16 memory and then the 512 SSD, this will come out to 1400 USD. And then the XPS, at least on the Dell website, as of this date, it's 1100. I have to include tax, so it is slightly cheaper. So that's the second thing. Then the third thing is that it's actually lighter than the base model MacBook Air. So it comes in at 1.23 kilos. And I'm in the US, but I like to use kilos. And then the base model MacBook Air comes in at 1.29 kilos. So it's actually lighter than the MacBook Air, but of course that comes with consequences. So the consequences, and now we're going to go back to the rest of the design choices that they'll decide to make, and they pretty much all kind of follow the MacBook. So as I was saying, it only has two Type-C ports, but if you'll notice, there's no headphone jack. So they took out the headphone jack, and if you use a MacBook, you're probably going to use Bluetooth earbuds. You're probably going to use AirPods. But if you're a Windows user, you're probably aware that Bluetooth earbuds and headphones do not work particularly well with Windows. So as a result, you can't use wired earbuds, wired headphones. You have to use some kind of Bluetooth connection. And since Bluetooth connections suck on Windows, you're pretty much not gonna want to listen to anything or like play any kind of video or anything like that where you'd have to listen to the audio on this machine. So that's a pretty big downside, and Dell got, I think, a lot of negative feedback about removing the headphone jack on the XPS 13 Plus. The next questionable design choice made from Dell on this laptop is using capacitive touch keys for the function row. So again, following Apple's footsteps, Apple, for a couple years on their laptops, changed the function row to a touch bar. Now on Apple's touch bar, you can customize it. Uh, they have a couple of options. I've used it, and if I had a MacBook with the touch bar, then I would just change it to how I would have, like, I would treat it as if it was like a regular function row with like physical keys. So on the XPS Plus, this row is not customizable. And I think that a lot of people really dislike the touch bar and really dislike, touch sensor controls in general. And for this machine, it's not really any different. Most people, they looked at this design and they just questioned, why would they change a physical function row to touch controls when physical is way better. The last questionable design choice that Dell decided to make on this laptop, and I guess sort of the elephant in the room, you might have noticed that the whole time I was showing this image, there's no trackpad that you can see. And that's because there is one, and it's invisible. Something, I don't know how big it is. But for me, when I first saw this design choice, I kind of thought of having no crosshair in an FPS game. So in FPS games, having a crosshair is kind of nice to have, and it kind of, gun whatever, like you shoot it, it'll still shoot, but it's just nice to have the crosshair because you kind of know where you're shooting at. Well, it'd be kind of nice if the XPS 13 Plus had a trackpad that you can actually see, similar to the one that they had on the old XPS laptops, as well as literally every other laptop that exists. For the lineup they're releasing in 2024, they're going to be having three new ones, in quotes. So the 16, the 14, and they're rebranding or revamping, as they put it, the XPS 13 Plus to just a 13. So there are pretty much no design differences between any of them. It's just the same, like, touch bar thingy and invisible trackpad and little ports. But the 14 and the 16 will have dedicated GPUs. So the 14 will have a 4050 and the 16 will have up to a 4070. Now, for gaming laptops, I'm not one to recommend them if you can just get a gaming desktop, but if you must have a gaming laptop, I would consider something else just because of the price point. Because I think that you can definitely find a decent gaming laptop for less than, as I put it here, 1900 US for the 16 and then 1700 for the 14. But yeah, too many strange design choices that I think Dell made with the XPS 13, 14, and 16. But I am curious how this lineup will go, as well as the future of the XPS in the future for Dell.